Welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young, CEO of WBC. WBC is the unprecedented alliance of over 80 women business organizations and hundreds of business leaders building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. As well, WBC lives its commitment to DEI, and members of our leadership, staff, board of directors, and our WBC Champions Network include more than 34% people of color. And every single one of our action initiatives has goals and targets for DEI for 2025 and 2030. So please check the chat for our action initiatives through which we aim to accelerate change, drive impact. Each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of women's voices for change, and by showcasing leaders committed to allyship, inclusivity, and driving corporate purpose. Today, we want to talk about developing the workforce, the next generation, the broken rung, and women throughout the workforce. As McKinsey shared in their 2023 Women in the Workplace report, the broken rung is the greatest obstacle women face on their path to leadership. McKinsey's data shows that for every 100 men promoted from entry level to manager, 87 women were promoted. And this gap continues for women of color. This year, 73 women of color were promoted to manager for every 100 men. So companies must be considering how they develop and track outcomes for their workforce, particularly for women and women of color. And it is critical that companies invest in the development for their leaders and provide clear pathways to leadership for women at the middle management level of their organization. And WBC is proud to work with partners like Gemma and Tone Networks who are doing this work every day. Gemma, I am so excited to have you here today so we can talk about your insights and your expertise as we're building out leadership and pathways for women. So welcome, Gemma.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
So, I would love to talk about your passion, Gemma, right? You've had a long career in media and telecommunication, but what sparked your passion for developing leaders and creating pathways for leadership?
I was thanks for asking that question. It's a really good one. I would say I was very lucky and fortunate to experience the power of mentorship and executive coaching and how transformative that can be. And what I realized was that, that's a scarce resource and that not everyone gets that executive coach, that mentor, or that sponsor. And what I wanted to do was find a way to make that knowledge accessible to all women so that we would present it in a different form factor so that we would all then have the benefit of that knowledge that really only a very small percentage of the employee population get. So that's really my passion, is to get everyone access to how to grow, how to navigate in organizations, how to be an empathetic leader, all the things that you learn perhaps when you've been picked to go into a leadership program. Well, let's start that earlier, and let's manage that human capital pipeline much earlier and invest in it with different types of resources.
And you talked a little bit about the format of how you deliver that, right? And I know that Tone Networks, your work is sort of grounded in video content. Can you talk about like the choice of that medium, how you're doing it, and what impact you've seen? Because you also talked about accessibility.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just on in a meeting 2 days ago, and the person said, "Is your stuff like a lot of PowerPoint presentations and things like that?" And I was just able to launch. I'm like, "Oh, no, no, no. We're all video content based, and think of us as TikTok for your professional development." And of course, his eyes lit up. He said, "Oh, that I get." And so what we find is that in developing tone, we had to listen to our audience and understand what they needed. And what they needed were a couple things, and it's really part of our secret sauce. One, they don't have a lot of time. So how do we create content that addresses, those short intervals? They don't have a big time commitment. Also, they needed it to be personalized for them. Don't give me, an endless scroll, and don't make me search for it because again, I don't have time, right? And then it needed to be, short and fun because again, if we don't start with that that it's interesting, well, you kind of don't get past go. And there's certainly a lot of video and a lot of content out there that is being created. But I think what is most important is you've got to create content that people want to engage with. And what we see, and we're really proud of this, we actually just got these stats in, is that over 96% of our members want to continue with Tone year after year after year. So they continue to engage. And again, it's because video is it's a fun way to learn, right? We also are no tests. All the things that sometimes you don't like about learning, well, we're not there. No shame. Oh, you didn't get it. You can watch the video again and learn that. And what we've also found is that we're really proud that 95% of our clients renew too, because they're seeing the results. And again, if you don't get engagement, you really don't get past go. And so that's why we use video.
And I'd love to talk a little bit of like how important that kind of, you could call it like executive education, right? How part that the sort of training piece of it is to sort of, breaking through and creating those pathways, right? Because we know there's things like allyship, there's sponsorship, there's mentorship, right? This piece of it, and to your point about sort of making this easily accessible, fitting in with their schedule. How important is that, right? Because people come to me often, I'm sure they come to you like, do I really need this? Like, I'm just going to work hard and be able to kind of forge my
Right.
pathway.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, everybody does, right? And so I think that's a big mistake that we often make. It's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna work hard, heads down, and, I'll get recognized and I will get promoted." Well, that isn't the way it works, right? And so that's what Tone really needs to teach people. And, if you're a lifelong learner, and Gwen, I know you've seen our content, it appeals to everyone, right? It appeals to allies and sponsors and mentors, men, women, everyone. If you're interested in professional development, it's appealing. I think what's most important for that earlier group, that earlier part of that talent pipeline, is that they haven't had that exposure yet. And so we need to help them discover that yes, executive presence is something you need to know, and you need to know what it is. You also need to know how to have difficult conversations. And those are just some of the examples. You need to understand how to read a room, because you know what? Not everybody has the same agenda that you do. And that's a real wake up call, earlier in your career. It's also great from a middle manager standpoint, right? Because so often those middle managers are promoted because they're great at what they do, right? But then they're not
Mhm.
necessarily given additional training to understand, well, now I'm a leader of all of this group, and how do I motivate them? How do I manage them? How do I understand each individual? How do I create psychological safety for them? How do I get the most out of my team? What are the different management styles that I need to learn and practice, right? Because those are things, it's like, you manage one way, but that may not work for some people. So all of those concepts are just examples of what we want to make sure women are getting access to earlier in their career. And last but not least on that one, I just must say this, is that raise your hand early and often. Don't wait. That's really important. And again, so what if you don't have all the skills? You're going to learn it. You can figure it out. And again, that is the type of knowledge that we're looking to deploy in a very, what I would say, positive and literally can do. You can do this because what we also find is certain learning and development can also be a little shaming sometimes. You should know better and you shouldn't do this. You know what? There's enough of that in the world. So part of what Tone is, it's enlightening, it's engaging, it's uplifting, and you actually feel like, yeah, I can do this. And so that's what we want to do. We want to get people to absorb the knowledge and then have the confidence to actually start moving forward with that behavioral change.
I love that. I love that. And I think what's interesting is you were talking about too, like we were talking about this before, like, the workforce has changed. There's a whole bunch of, AI, digital transformation, remote work, empathetic leadership, authenticity, concepts that, 10 years ago weren't necessarily at the forefront of business conversations. Where are
Right.
these opportunities, right? You can put this content online for video. What are the other, like, what are you excited about as you look forward?
I'm excited about sort of how diversity, equity, and inclusion has gotten, is even broader, and it always has been. But I think we're making a more concerted effort to make sure that everyone feels included, because at the end of the day, none of what we do can be exclusionary because that does not create the environment that most companies are looking for. So I'm excited about that and the opportunity to create content that more intentionally focuses running through what we call at Tone kind of the lenses. So, and when we say lens, we mean lens as I'm a manager. How does emotional EQ affect me as a manager and my employees? As a individual contributor, how does that affect me? How does that affect me as someone in the LBGT plus community? How does that affect me as someone that is a woman of color? So I think that's exciting to be pushing on these ideas that have a general sense of here's what the concept is, but then to take it one step further and then to push that into these individualized learning moments, if you will. The other thing I'm really excited about, because Gwen, as you know, I'm just a geek at heart, is I'm very excited about AI. I'm excited, but I'm also cautious. I think the more we get into AI, the more we'll see that even today, it's wonderful, but there's also a lot of false positives. I think what's going to come out of that is consumer trust is going to be mission critical. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on at Tone is that trust is something that we build. You just don't assume it, but we build it with our members. And it's evidenced by them wanting to continue to engage with Tone year after year after year. But that's a big deal. So trust is going to be a big deal. And then some of those other concepts that we just talked about, critical thinking, problem solving, those are things that AI, at least in the early stages, can't do. And those are things that we're all going to need to brush up on. We're also really going to need to brush up on that empathetic leadership because the more technology we use, the easier it is for us to get a little removed. And as we know, we can all get rusty on our social skills. And so we're going to need to continue to focus on that.
I love that, Rusty, and the social skills. As the world's coming back and out in there, well, I want to switch the lens a little bit, right? Because you are, women-owned business in WBC. We work a lot with sort of entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses. Talk a little bit about, how Tone's working with there and how this applies in that situation. In some ways, it's no different. I know sizes of company matter, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting you said, well, gosh, I think, as a woman entrepreneur, I will honestly say it can be very lonely out there. And I think what WBC does, as well as Tone, is we create a sense of community that you're not alone. And that is mission critical in order to just keep going day after day, because some days are easier than others. And I would say, as for the actual content, well, it is there. You still have the same challenges, right? You still have the confidence challenges. You still have executive presence. You still have, managing your career. Well, managing your career is managing your business. And, how do you do that? And what do you need to do? Strategic thinking. So a lot of the same concepts apply. But I think, especially when you're out there on your own,
Yeah.
um, that sense of community is really important. And again, what Tone does in not only providing this content, but we also push content to you. And one of the things we all can suffer from is not making any time for ourselves. And so part of our strategy in pushing content, right? We were talking earlier about strategies and tactics, right? Is we push that content to basically interrupt you during your day to remind you to take a few minutes to invest in yourself. Because otherwise, oftentimes we're last on our list. And that goes for women in any workplace, whether it's an entrepreneur or corporate America.
We're just talking. It's funny. I was talking last night with a couple women about it. She said, you're always juggling balls. And she said, the thing is, some of those balls are rubber and some of those balls are glass.
Mm.
Right? So the rubber ones, when you drop them, they'll bounce back. So the glass ones, and one of the glass ones we were talking about is your ability to be, health and well-being, the best leader you can be. And so your point about sort of interrupting and going, you need to take care of yourself, whether you're the business owner or whether you're sort of in the business in order to be able to kind of bring your best self.
Absolutely, Gwen. And we actually, in developing Tone, kind of recognize that at the get go. Because what I like to say is, we looked at the whole person. Because when you step into the office, and more of us are stepping into the office these days, you don't leave your personal life behind, and what that means. And so your well being is impacted by your personal life and your work life. And so it is mission critical for you to have, optimal performance to take care of yourself. And so you'll actually see at Tone, we see that as part of leadership development, because if a leader isn't taking care of themselves, well, then what kind of role modeling is that? And role modeling is such an important aspect of teaching and learning when it comes to success.
Building those role models. So what, as you know, we always love to end, what is the call to action? Like what do you want to tell the audience, tell the company?
Okay.
What's your call to action,
Well, a
Jen?
couple things. One, the call to action here would be, hey, um, make sure you're investing in yourself. And if you're not, make sure your company is investing in yourself and you're then getting those tools because it matters. And you need to learn these skills early and you'll just be more successful and you'll be happier. So that's one. So happy, check us out. We're happy to, talk to anyone who's interested. We have several business models. So that's one. Two is I would like to invite everyone to something that Tone is doing, and it's going to be a free event. So you actually don't have to have a Tone membership, but it's really our PSA for women when it comes to pay parity, and we're going to be doing that in March. And in March, that's when some women in the United States actually reach pay parity. And what happens is then people of color and all other different communities then start to get pay parity later in the year. And what we want to do is, very much in line with the Tone brand, is actually do a session which helps you navigate, well, what do you do? So, how do you make sure you're being paid fairly and equitably? How do you navigate this thing called pay transparency? And how do you make sure that, if that's in your company, who do you talk to and how do you go about it? So it's a very practical session, but it'll be taking place in March. And it's called Tone Trailblazers Time to Pay Up 2024. We hope to make this an annual event, and it's going to be on March 15th. So I would ask that you mark your calendars because anyone listening to this, whether you're a woman, sponsor, ally, mentor, community, partners, everyone should be on this because we can all benefit from learning how to address these disparities and how to advocate for each other.
Absolutely. And such a critical part of building the pathways to leadership. So love that. Thank you, Gemma. But that is unfortunately all that we have time for today. So we
Hey,
invite, we could go forever. Gemma and I are like, and I'm like, we could talk about the pay equity playbook WBC put out,
we
but you'll hear more
could.
from us, right?
Yes,
Together this year.
we will be.
We will. So we invite everyone to wbcollaborative.org to learn more about WBC's initiatives to increase women in the C-suite and boardroom, those top leadership roles, to address the underrepresentation of women throughout the workforce and industries. And as we talked about today, how we're going to advance a pipeline of women leaders that are going to bring gender, pay equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion to the business landscape. So join us weekly. Keep up to date on our progress, the movement for gender equity in business, by following us on social media at WB Collaborative, at Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And Gemma, I so look forward to continuing this work with you and the next Trailblazer presentation by Tone. Thank you so much for today.